one other important part is registering your method information. So if we go to the next slide, if you go to the Tephra community, you will see that there is already a section for method templates. And the reason why these method templates were created was to make sure that all of the information related to the calibration and the instrument will be correctly and comprehensively shared so that all of the work is more reusable. These methods are meant to be submitted for a lab-specific setup. So in an ideal world, this is going to be done once, probably by the expert on the method, so a lab manager. And this would also help with all of the end users. Let's say you have a lot of students in your lab and they could just use this method UI that you receive from the template, and then all of the accurate information will be shared across all of the different datasets that will use that instrument. These templates can be versioned, so if anything changes in your calibrations, that can be updated. And then you can just cite this directly in the datasets, or if you have a paper that has restrictions on the length, you could add that as well. Okay, and we should also be talking about the next slide, which is the data template next. So the data templates hold the actual data metadata about what analyses you've conducted on your samples. The way that these are set up, there is an expectation that you have already registered your samples, and all of the metadata on your samples, such as location information, will be ingested into SESAR so that you can just paste in your IGSNs, and those will be incorporated into ECL. And this will also help have maps on your landing pages for the data sets, and it's going to be incorporated in DOI, and everything becomes a nice package. When you fill out a data template, you are actually filling out the same fields that were flagged in the Tephra community as being the best practice recommendations. So we just did a mapping of the fields that we had to the fields that are in the best practice recommendations. For the EarthChem library, the database is not as structured as for SESAR, so you can also add whatever extra fields you will need for describing your lab procedures and so on, any type of comments. Those won't be ingested in any type of synthesis, but it will be there in your data package for the data set if you want to have those notes for your publication. And these can also be versioned in the same way. You would submit another data package, you would get a new DOI, and these DOIs would be linked as the previous and the new version. So next, we're going to go through an actual demo. I can show you what types of fields to expect and what the process would be for this online submission for the EarthChem library. So I think I should be sharing now. Let's go. So can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay. So this is an example of a method template. Yet again, we're putting Steve on the spot here. This is what it would look like to put in metadata for your laboratory. It has two different parts. The first one just identifies what your instrument is, what type of funding you have, if there are some references that are associated with developing the method, and some general analytical procedure fields. As you can see, some of these fields are bold and capital. That means that they are mandatory as decided through a few rounds of community back and forth of what would be best practices. And they have been reviewed after we did them together. And after you fill out this part, you should also go to the acquisition and post-processing metadata and be sure that for each parameter that you analyzed, you put in at least the beam current. But the more information, the better in terms of reproducing, especially normalization. So let's move on for a moment to the data template, and then we're going to go through how you submit these. For data template, the first part that you have to fill in would be the actual name of your data table. Ideally, you would have an analytical method DOI, so you had already filled in the previous template, you got a DOI for it, and you put it in here. That would mean that you don't have to fill in any additional metadata for your method. And then you would go on to fill in whatever fields are relevant to you. There are some extra recommendations, such as putting in the normalized data and other good recommendations in here of how to present all of this metadata for it to be as reusable as possible for the Tephra community and make sure that we have standardized data. Ideally, you should have your IGSNs ready so you can just paste them in here. And that way, these columns will be ingested directly into the system and you don't have to do anything in the online form. We always recommend that you don't have any type of spacing here, because that would mean that you wouldn't get all of the IGSNs correctly ingested in. Another good practice is to try to avoid any type of highlighting, because that's not going to be machine readable. Instead, what you could do is make sure to add your own fields and have any type of other comments in a different column for each line. So I don't want to go too much specifically into this. Each field has a definition and sometimes examples. You can always contact one of the curators for more help with this, and the examples are posted on the EarthChem community as well. So let's go into what a submission would look like. If you were going through the community page for Tephra, you would be clicking the Submit Tephra Data to ECL. Right now, we're going to go through the test version so that we don't submit any fake data. I'm already logged in here, but the process looks exactly the same as it did for SESAR. You would get a login page that has ORCID or GeoPass options, but we recommend using your ORCID for this. So then that would already pre-populate some of your contributor information. We also always recommend, if you have funding information related to this, to add it here, and then that would validate and put it straight into the landing page. So let's go ahead and make a little submission. I would be putting in an individual data set, and let's say that you are contributing something on behalf of other authors. In that case, you would disactivate this little check mark that says that I am lead author. So instead of getting all of your information already input from here, you could add a new lead author. Whatever email you would use here as the lead author email, that would be what the curators use to contact you. So you can put in whoever the lead author and then co-authors, just the same. ORCIDs are not mandatory, but we do recommend them. But as you can see, the abstract is. And so is your data type. Let's say that I am putting in some rock chemistry. And you also want some keywords and a spatial coverage. And it's going to be regional in my case. And if you have any related information, you could add if this is related to a specific volcano number, or if you wanted to put in your IGSNs manually instead of have them be ingested through the file, you could do that here. But if you have put them already in the file, you don't have to do this. So we can go ahead and upload our data file, which we have previously completed. And what you would also include here would be your SESAR comprehensive templates, just to make sure that all of that extra metadata that you put in for your files gets saved here with your submission. So remember, we said that if you're putting in the comprehensive metadata for the samples, not all of those fields are going to be mapped to SESAR. And if you want to preserve that information, you should also be adding that to your submission here. So we could just, I don't have Sarah's file, but we could just pretend that these are sample information. And then, oh, and I did it wrong. Of course, what you want to do is add another file and make sure that all of your files are added correctly. So now I have both of my files, and I want to keep this information private for a little bit. So I'm going to say that this is going to be available next month. And I am happy with the share alike, so I'm going to leave it. This is a nice little feature. If you are willing to make your data available through PetDB, then you would click on suggest my data set to PetDB, and that would alert the PetDB curator that there is a data set going in that requires their attention. We recommend this for Tephra because that way, if we have all of the standardized data more accessible, it's going to be a great resource for everyone. So you can either save your progress if you want to come back to this later, or you can go ahead and submit if you're happy with it. And you would get a confirmation both here as well as with the email that you used to make your profile, that this has been received, and then you would be contacted by the curators for the rest. All right, I think I'm going to stop sharing for now.
And actually, at that point, we're at time for questions. And Lucia, you've got one in the Q&A that's asking what the different data licensing types are. I was going to try and pull them up, but since now you're done, maybe you could have a brief.
So most of our licenses are through Creative Commons. The idea is that even if you're not really aware about it, most things that are published have some kind of a license associated with it. And if it's an open license, it means that your data can be remixed or shared in very specific conditions. And you can set the level of privacy. Like if you have a license like CC0, then anybody could do anything with it as long as they cite you. This kind of preserves your copyright. If you have a share alike, then you don't have to. There are a few more restrictions. You can read about them both on our policies, and I'll drop that in the chat in a minute, or you can find out more directly at Creative Commons. So right now, I think we support 4 different license types, and we're going to expand that to have different software licensing. And what is the relationship between PetDB and EarthChem? A wonderful question. So there's a lot of history here. EarthChem is the broader umbrella under which the PetDB was initiated. I don't want to get the years wrong, but it's been going for more than 20 years. And originally it was the mantle xenolith. Well, actually before that, it was only for mid-ocean basalts. And then we had mantle xenoliths. And now we have data from multiple rock types. And we are going to expand beyond rock types in the future. But for the EarthChem library, when you submit your files, if you want them to be searchable beyond flat files and have them integrated with other publications that have been peer-reviewed and might be on the same discipline, then you would have to suggest your data set for PetDB. And if that doesn't make sense, I can elaborate more.
Yeah. Could I throw in a comment? I mean, this really is PetDB for people who are, for Tephra chronologists who's run some analysis and has this unknown sample and they want to figure out what is it. Normally that requires comparing it to some kind of reference data set, which would be a compilation of data from a variety of different sources. And so PetDB would be a way of providing that kind of functionality. And so if many members of the community had put in data into PetDB for a variety of different things, then somebody else later could come in with a sample and they could put that in and start doing some geochemical search, and then it would come out with things that are similar to that. And maybe they'd be able to figure out that, oh, there's 20 samples of let's say the Loki Tephra from Iceland that have chemistry similar to yours. And then they'd be able to see, okay, what data sets do those belong to? What papers are associated with? Where are they located geographically? And so it could open up all of that kind of discoverability.
All right, do we have any other questions? I'm gonna do that awkward staring time where we give you guys time to think.
I do have a couple of other comments if there's a lull while people are thinking. So another thing about that EarthChem data template is, well, there's several things in there. One of them is it has a capability of putting in a Smithsonian Global Volcanism code or a specific Tephra name on a analysis by analysis basis. And that's really useful for Tephra because Tephra is very different the way we do glass shards and analyze individual pieces. It's very different than what somebody would do with, let's say, a whole rock analysis where they have the whole sample and it's all combined together and they do XRF and they get one set of numbers. Tephra people will analyze a sample, right, and get lots of analyses for all kinds of individual grains. And it's quite common for there to be mixtures of things, right, where you have a sample that it's mostly one kind of Tephra, but there are traces of something else that maybe got mixed into it. Maybe there's some reworking. And so on a data line by data line basis, it's possible to specify that these analyses are from, let's say, one eruption, and then there's these other analyses which are outliers or maybe belong to a different eruption. And so you can annotate things, annotate your analyses at a point by point basis if you wish. And that's going to be really powerful, especially when people then go searching against that data. Those things will be identified. Another thing that's new is that to support the community's need to be able to report data on reference materials and quality control materials. Oftentimes we'll use the phrase secondary standards. So let's say you did all your unknowns, but then you analyze like the Lipari obsidian glass in your method as like a quality control check. So now you can report the data on those reference materials in the same spreadsheet at the same time as all of your unknown analyses. And so it makes it much more convenient to be able to make that quality control data available to people.
Thank you. I want to follow up too. It's something that Lucy put in the chat about and what Steve brought up, the volcano numbers. At this time, SESAR, you can add them into SESAR, but we're not supporting them as a linked field, but we do plan on incorporating that into our system in the future, so that will act similar to the way EarthChem Library does. And it looks like we haven't gotten any other questions. Let's move on. I really do appreciate, I want to say this because hopefully the tone came off correctly. We appreciate the comments and criticisms for these templates that we've created and the work that we've demoed here today, because this is really, it's a community effort for the community. And you guys are some of the first people to see these finished products. So it helps to get that information on where were we limiting our thinking, or where were we being more complex than we needed to be. And we welcome you to provide comments back on these templates and this process, positive and negative, through this form on the EarthChem website. You can get to that by going to that Tephra community space and then scrolling down to the bottom of the page, and there's a form that will allow you to also anonymously submit information. We hope to hear from you, especially, like I said, with the Tephra templates for the SESAR, because we've got a few bugs that we're still working out, but you might find other things along the way that we've missed. So any feedback is useful. And also positive feedback would be nice to hear too, just to know if you think these are useful tools, and maybe, as someone mentioned, the comprehensive maybe they think is more valuable than the simplified, and so on. Just any information that can help us adjust and improve these community tools as we move forward. Oops, wrong direction. And I just also want, oh, sorry, my slides are being a bit weird. Just want to close with a few concepts of next steps as sort of homework from the workshop. So you as users are welcome to go ahead and register your samples or submit your data to EarthChem using your own real data. I'm not sure, again, if that beta testing is the right word for the templates, but they're still in progress. And so it's part of our jobs as curators to help you with those submissions. And we're happy to help you with questions at any point along the submission process, either if that's creating an account, using the templates. If you get errors when you're uploading them or you're not sure what metadata to put in, feel free to reach out to us. That's part of our job. So your homework would be to go off and use these templates, but to reach out to us for help. So you can do that by either emailing us, and on the next slide I'll have our contact information, but you can also use the Tephra mailing list. And we encourage you to do that as well, because it's possible you might have a question that is a shared question amongst the community. And at that point, we can also help identify if one of you wants to have maybe a one-on-one session, we might make a small group session as well and invite some others to join. So using that listserv will be a good way to engage the community and to share what we're learning. As I mentioned, that feedback that you're giving us through the forms, we hope to incorporate some of those recommendations, either new versions of the templates or improvements. We also will add some of those questions to our frequently asked questions on our websites to help other users. And so you can either use that method to provide information, or you can communicate on the Tephra listserv. And so we thank you for attending this session. We really appreciate your time and effort. And also we hope that you might explore these templates and give us feedback. Again, the templates are found on the Tephra community page, which is this first link. The second is a tutorial, which is in case you needed a little bit more information about what is EarthChem and what is SESAR. It also covers our sister service, Astromat. And then if you have questions, you can contact us at either of these email addresses, which are info@earthchem.org for EarthChem and info@geosamples.org for SESAR. And let me take a quick look at the Q&As before we hand back over to the moderators or the hosts. Let's see. What other types of data, not geochemistry, can be uploaded? I'm assuming this is for EarthChem, and it looks like Lucy's answering that in the chat. So I'll let her answer that. And the next question is thinking about the physical properties of Tephra. I'm assuming that's a follow-up, is that you're asking about, can you submit some other things? Unless Lucy wants to answer live, I'll let her answer that in the chat. And let's see, let me check the other. See, I think that's it. I'm just checking the host chat to make sure I'm not missing anything, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let them take over. So thank you again.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Lucy. This was a lot of information and really helpful. And I think a number of us are probably going to be digesting all of this for a little while, but that's all right. We will first have the recording and the Q&A on the website. So if you wish to go back and review any of the presentation or any of the questions and answers, you'll be able to do that later. And by all means, send emails to the EarthChem and SESAR email addresses, or post questions on the listserv. That would be really helpful. I would also like to point out that next week we'll have our last session of the 4. We'll be switching back to Thursday. And just like the starting first session was on a Thursday, and then we've had 2 Fridays, and we'll go back to Thursday. That session 4 is meant to be more forward-looking and to have discussion about what is, so we can think about what has been covered, what needs are covered by the tools that exist, what things maybe does the community need that we don't have a solution for yet, or are there maybe other ways to address some of these things that might be improvements on what we've been doing. Are there other systems and tools out there that could be incorporated into the bigger framework? Lots of different kinds of things like that are possible. And so we have a input form, and let me switch over to the web browser here. So there's a form that we've developed, and it would be really great if you all took a look at that over the next few days and perhaps put in some ideas and suggestions, things that would give us some things to use as starting points to aid in the discussion during session 4. Does anyone else have anything to add? Well, then I guess we're at the point of saying thank you to everyone for attending and putting in all those great questions. You made us think quite a lot. And hopefully we'll see you all next week.